Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
It came back with a test of 25 micrograms per deciliter, which was 5 times the level that the CDC said was dangerous at that time. In some ways, the response to lead poisoning is reactive. Why is it still so prevalent in our environment? It's really what I want a better answer to than what I feel like I have, which is just that it's hard to get rid of.
I'm Sarah Fensky. Today, a new journalism series kicks off. It's spearheaded by NPR's Midwest Newsroom and the nonprofit Missouri Independent. The 6-month project will look at the toll of lead poisoning throughout the Midwest. And Missouri is one state that is seeing particular focus from the reporters. Allison Kite is the lead reporter on this project. She is a data journalist for the Missouri Independent, and she joins us today. Allison Kite, welcome.
Thanks, Sarah. It's good to be here.
So, Allison, you start your story with Lisa Pasco. She was living in St. Louis when her son tested positive for elevated lead levels. What did she learn about how he'd been exposed?
Yeah, so she took her son to the pediatrician, had no reason to suspect elevated blood lead levels, and they recommended a lead test, and it came back with a test of 25 micrograms per deciliter, which was 5 times the level that the CDC said was dangerous at that time. And some inspectors came out to look at their home and determined that it was the old lead paint on the windows of the house on the outside. When they opened and closed those windows, that made dust out of the lead paint that settled in the soil, and her son would play in the yard in front of that window, and that turned out to be how he was exposed.
So he had these highly elevated levels. What's the risk of having elevated levels of lead in the blood?
I'm so sorry, Sarah. You cut out for me there for a second. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, we must be having some internet problem here today. It does happen. What is the risk that comes with having elevated lead levels?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there are a variety of ways it can present. Developmental delays, in the case of Lisa's son, ADHD, aggression. It can increase your risk of mortality from cardiovascular disease later in life. It can result in the loss of IQ points. And there's also a link between lead poisoning and criminality.
So how big of a problem is this in the Midwest?
Sure. So in Missouri's latest online report, which was ending in the summer of 2018, there were about 2,500 kids who tested with elevated blood lead levels. But in the 4 states that we're looking at, several thousand kids experience this every year. So even though, we've known that lead is toxic for centuries, and we've banned it in new paint and in gasoline for our cars for decades, we're still dealing with this very major legacy lead problem.
Yeah, I mean, as you say there have been some real attempts to deal with this. It isn't like people are saying, okay, this isn't a problem. Like, they took lead out of gas. You're not supposed to paint your house with lead-based paint anymore. So this is just coming from residual sources, things like paint that's already there on the windows.
Yeah, paint is far and away the largest threat. Lead in water from old lead water pipes is another one. Contaminated soil from when there was lead in gasoline, would burn and go into the atmosphere and then settle in the soil. Imported spices and some household products can be a problem. And then lead is still allowed in fuel for small airplanes. So it can be an issue of contamination near smaller airports as well. So those are kind of the primary pathways.
And so there has been this major attempt to crack down on this. And so I think of, my fellow 70s kids, people who grew up before this crackdown. You had a great quote in your story. This is from Bruce Lanphier. He's a longtime researcher and professor at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. He asks, how could it be that in the 70s, virtually by today's standards, all kids were lead poisoned? Is this a problem for adults across the Midwest, across the U.S., and they just don't even realize that this is what caused some of the problems they have?
Yeah, there was a study last year that found, I think, about half of Americans living today were exposed to dangerous lead levels in their childhood. On average, folks between the 50s and 1980 lost about 2.5 IQ points because of lead. And IQ is, a flawed indicator, but in some ways, but yeah, it was a major problem for kind of the boomer and Gen X generations.
You have a devastating quote in this story. Once a kid is exposed to lead, it is not reversible. So this is something where if you find out, your kid has tested high for this is something where they could have these problems no matter what you do next.
Certainly. And, there are things that you can do to decrease your absorption of lead. A healthy diet, lots of vitamins and minerals can help if you're exposed to lead to keep it from your body from absorbing it. But a lot of, kids that are exposed to lead might need some educational support, special education, things like that.
So you talked, again, this story starts with this woman, Lisa Pascoe, living in St. Louis, realizes that her kid, through no fault of hers, has gotten this pretty severe lead poisoning. This was back in 2012, so 10 years have passed. How's he doing today?
Yeah, so he, like I mentioned, has ADHD. I think that they've put a lot of work into getting him the support that he needs to do well in school. But it could be a lifelong struggle in some regards.
And it sounds like this is something that for his mother, this is just foremost on her mind. She's had some other kids. She's thinking about this nonstop.
Certainly. Yeah. They, her family eventually moved out of St. Louis City to St. Louis County. They continue to test her younger daughter's toys and crayons to make sure that they're not bringing lead into the house. They're, cautious about going over to family and friends' houses if they're renovating. They're very vigilant compared to most parents when it comes to lead.
And so we talked a bit about how they've now banned lead in many of these places where kids used to be exposed. Are local governments being proactive about this issue going forward when it comes to things like testing for what's already there in the environment?
Sure. So that's something that we definitely want to take a closer look at. But what I can say now is it does vary. For example, I believe St. Louis County, if a child has a blood lead level of 10 micrograms per deciliter or above, they will come do a home inspection. Here in Kansas City, where I live, I believe you can get a test kit from the health department to test some spots in your home yourself. In Omaha, Nebraska, if your house is built before 1978, you can request a test before your child has been exposed to lead. And that was one of the points that a public health official in Nebraska made, is that in some ways the response to lead poisoning is reactive, and you're, fixing these problems after a kid has already been harmed instead of fixing them before the kid has the opportunity to be exposed to lead.
So this story that you published today, we want to encourage people. You can see this at stlpr.org. There's also an audio version. You can hear that on St. Louis Public Radio. I'm sure that'll be playing again this afternoon. You can also check that podcast version there on our website. So this was your first story. Where is this project going to go from here?
Sure. So I think my driving question is, this is a toxin that we've known as dangerous for centuries. Why is it still so prevalent in our environment? It's really what I want a better answer to than what I feel like I have, which is just that it's hard to get rid of. So that's kind of where I'd like to go. And then, examining the impacts it's had on generations of kids in the Midwest.
So that's going to be a lot to look at. We're going to keep an eye on this as it continues. Allison Kite, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It was an honor.
And Allison is a data reporter for the Missouri Independent and the Kansas Reflector with a focus on the environment and agriculture. You can read her story. It was co-written by Niara Savage of NPR's Midwest Newsroom. That's at stlpr.org.
Today's episode was produced by Sarah Fensky with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here. If you learned something new from today's episode, consider leaving us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the easiest way to help people discover our show. We appreciate it. Thank you. St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.